Welcome to another edition of Turn 6 Garage, and today we're discussing 10 grand classic Mercedes. You got 10 grand to spend on a classic car. You want something that's somewhat drivable, reliable, easy to work on, good to drive, good to have fun with, and something you could sort of use as a quasi-daily driver. And that's what makes old Mercedes like this C180 and this E230 such good cars if you want something like that. Now, this E230 you'll recognise, this is my 1997 E230. This is the car that's been on my channel for quite a while now, and the C180 is one of our more recent purchases. Now, for 10 grand you could sort one of these out and have a pretty good time. You could buy a runner for something like a 1500, 2 grand, spend 8 or 9 and you get a good car. Or you could buy a nice one owner, full service history car that needs a bit of work and you'll still get to 10 grand, pay 5 for the car and spend a 5 to fix it. So, what should you do? Should you go Team C or Team E? Or does it depend on what you find, and is it down to what engine's actually in the car? So, without further ado, let's have a look at each car. A C180 like this is about the size of a modern Mazda 3. It's not especially big, and you notice that when you come in the car. The rear legroom isn't especially generous. Behind the 6-foot driver, I can just squeeze myself in here. Yeah, it ain't the biggest thing in the world. But, it does have decent room in the front. Although the boot's not exactly perfect though. It's not as big as that of an E, but still thoroughly practical, reasonable 4-seater. You could easily drive this every day. The C of this period has 4 airbags, it's got ASR on it, so it's got reasonable safety features. Early cars only came with 1 airbag, and later 2, so definitely in a C, a car like this, a 98, 99 model year or 99, 2000 model year, something like that from, I'd say, mid-98 onwards, these are the best buys of the lot. They're the most practical, they're the best built. So if you're looking for a C, one of this period certainly is where you should be looking. They did get these later ones a lot better than the early cars. Early cars were a little bit troublesome here and there. Various engines you can get in the C-Class. You can get petrol and diesel, so the M111 is in this one. You can get, that's a C180 from 1993 to 2000. You can get a C200 with the 2-litre version of this engine. You can get a C240 with the M112 from 1997 onwards. And you could even get the C280 with the M104 engine from 93 to 97. Plenty of engine choices. You could also get a 5-cylinder diesel, C250 diesel, if you want to look like a Grecian taxi driver, or like the creepy one that I was in, where the taxi driver was driving like a maniac in Crete 9 years ago and thinking I was going to die in the back of one of these things. You could get all the engines with this car. You did get the AMG versions, the C36 with the 3.6 litre V6, C36 with the 3.6 litre inline 6, and the C43 with a big V8 in it. But these are quite expensive now, so if you want a cheap practical classic, you'd be looking at a C180 because there's just more of them around. However, one thing you do have to look at with these cars is ownership and the way they've been treated. You can find some one owner, well cared for, loved example. They're fantastic. This one's actually not too bad. It's got a full service history, it's had a few owners, but it's been reasonably well looked after over the journey. But the thing is with the Cs, because these were quite common and quite cheap, they fell into the hands of those who abused them. So really think this through when you come to see one. It's all down to the example with one of these things. Get a good one, it'll be great. Get a crappy one, it'll be an endless money pit. I'd say go for one that's reasonable or good. Don't bother with the really crap ones unless you're a masochist like me. So, on to the E. Those who've watched this channel, this car needs no introduction. My 1997 Mercedes E230. Now, an E in the 10 grand price bracket, you still like the C, get all the options apart from the obvious AMGs and the V8s. So, E230 like this from 95 to 97, E320, 95, 97 with the inline M104 in the inline 6, the E320 from 97 to 2002 with the M112, which also powers the E240, as well as the E200 compressor, a supercharged M111 from 2000 to 2002. They're the engines you're likely to get. You're unlikely to get an E430 in this price bracket that's in decent nick, or if it's under 10 grand, it's going to be a bit of a money pit. So you'll be looking at a 4 or a 6-cylinder like you are in the C-Class, but you get so much more for your money. For example, plenty of rear legroom. It's a lot more comfortable to sit in this car. The boot's much bigger. This is the last generation of the Mercedes-Benz where you could tell the boot was designed for someone called Fearless Leader. You could throw a couple of bodies in here, no troubles. And it's soundproof too, so you can take them to fate of your choosing, and none will know any better. No wonder why dictators bought E's as their staff cars. But the E's got a lot more room. The E also feels a lot better built than the C. That's because the E was a lot more expensive than the C. But with that does come bigger bills. Parts are a bit more expensive for these things. The labour's not that much different depending on the engine. The 4s are very similar. Bits are a little more expensive. It's a little bit more thirsty in the 4-cylinder. It's a bigger engine. But you are getting more for your money, so that's something to consider. The 6s are a lot more thirsty than the 4s, particularly in these. So if fuel economy is your budget, 4 or a C might be a better thing, but there's a lot more for your money in the E. However, like the C, good one-owner ones, or well-cared-for examples, like this one here, are the ones you go for. E's, again, because they were leasemobiles, many came on the market cheap, relatively speaking, compared to what they were worth new. They fell into the hands of those who abused them. So you'll find plenty of rough-looking E230s out there that have had patchy histories and questionable odometers. But again, it's down to what it is and the example that you look at. It's all down to the point of the car with an E. So don't be afraid to buy a 4 or a 6. It depends on what you find. You find a one-owner granny special like this one, it's well worth the effort. When you sit in the C's cockpit, it's reasonably cramped in here. It's not that uncomfortable in terms of size, but it's not a very big car. Remember, this isn't particularly big compared to modern cars. And the switchgear feels very solid, like a typical Mercedes in this period. But the materials, they're cheap. You can tell this is built to a price. Glove box on a car with dual airbags is pretty useless. And some of this material doesn't age very well. The MB Tex on these was a lower grade than some of the earlier cars. Some of the seats like this on the cars have been hotter climates like to crack. But all is there. The nice Mercedes dials, the simple, well laid out dials are right in front of you. You've got the nice single wiper, and this one you've got a lovely sunroof, which is a desirable option to look for, although it does cost more in terms of replacing the curtain and the headliner. Bank on about $700 as opposed to $500 there. But all is there, electric windows, your leather. It's still a nice place to be. Even though this is a little bit on the cheap side to sit in, it's still a welcoming place to sit in every day. I'd be very happy daily driving one of these. When you sit in the E-Class, it really is a fantastic place to be. These seats are so comfortable. This dashboard is so well laid out. The switches are very similar to those on the C, if anything. I think they're the same systems, even though they're slightly different in the way they feel. Mind you, that might just be the difference between this being a German-built car and the C being a South African-built car. The switches still have that wonderful quality feel to them. The dashboard, dashcast is the same, well laid out, very easy to work with, which is fantastic. Now, the thing that makes the E so much better than the C, if you're someone like me, the driving position is a lot more comfortable. You can stretch out a bit more in this car. For someone of my size, it feels a lot more comfortable to sit in this over a long journey, having driven the two quite a distance. These two cars were both taxi cabs in the late 1990s, so if you're from Europe and you're used to seeing these things being driven around, there's a reason why they were taxis. Mind you, they weren't built as well as their predecessors. I'm going to say that now. A 190E or a W124 is better built. But they're getting on now, and they need money spent because they're getting old. So, they cost a lot more to buy, but they'll need every bit as much money to fix now just because of age and just the wear and tear items you've got to deal with, unless you've got one that's been restored. But, having said that, these are still very, very strong cars, especially compared to what's come afterwards in Mercedes-Benz. A lot of the newer ones, newer we go, the less durable they become to a point. So mid-2000s they weren't especially brilliant. Although in the late 2000s, early 2010s they got better, but I think now Mercedes are going down again. The quality of some of the later cars hasn't been as strong as some of these wonderful things. You can keep them running for reasonable money. The parts don't cost a lot if you know where to get them from. and also you have someone capable and competent working on them, that always helps. Not everyone is comfortable with these things, so your average garage mechanic may not always be the most comfortable person in the world with a car like this. It's always good to seek out a specialist who knows what they're doing. So really think this through in terms of maintenance. It is going to cost a bit more to service because you are going to need specialists. They're not particularly hard to work on, but they're not the sort of thing many people see in their repertoire as much now. So that is something you have to consider with these cars. Specialised labour is something you have to think about if you want to keep them going reliably. The other thing I can say about the E is it is the fearless leader staff car. It's what I love so much about driving this thing. You feel like you're driving a car and you work for someone called Fearless Leader. It is, of the old generation of Mercedes, it feels invincible. It feels like you could run into a pack of whatever you want to choose, insert. It feels like you could drive this thing into a brick wall and the brick wall comes off second best. If anything, there's been a few crashes I've seen where one of these things has hit a brick wall and the brick wall is entirely levelled. Useful. But of course, it's the sort of car you could say, you could take someone in the back and say, let me be your chauffeur. So if you want to look like a dictator, look like you work for some psycho dictator, or you feel like you want to drive like a crazy taxi driver from Germany circa 1997, this is great. And if you want to drive like a crazy Greek taxi driver, well, that would be the C-Class. So which one to go for? Well, if you're after an economy car that sort of doubles up as a classic and you want to do a bit of work on it yourself and you know roughly where to find some good prices on parts, then the C would be a good purchase if you're on a bit of a budget. This thing does use less fuel, it's cheaper to run than an E, and there's a bit less money involved in finding one, getting it on the road. For example, if you're able to pick one up for $3 grand that needs a bit of work, you'll be into the thing at about $8 grand and probably that'll be it for the car. Once you fix these things up, they go. That's the good thing about both the C and the E, with the 4-cylinder engine especially. Less so with the 6, there's a bit more complexity, but they're still pretty good. As long as you find one's been looked after and you can bring it back, then they should be nice and reliable. So that's where I'd be saying with the C, if you're on a budget, if you're on the 6 to 7 grand end, you could probably get a decent C for that money. You get a C for about, get one, needs a bit of work, and at about 6 to 7 grand, you'll have a decent car. Good running, daily driver. You can club it, you can drive it. Sort of car you could go stick another 100,000 Ks on even. If you look after it and you're willing to put the effort in, you could go pretty well with this thing. You go quite a long way with these cars, not have to go that far, which is really good. If you're someone like me, and you're willing to go the distance, and you like the big car, the E's the car. For somebody like me, it's what I want. Long distance car. The extra legroom and the extra boot space makes a bit of a difference in my world with this car, which is why I went for one of these things originally. Plus it was a decent example, and again at the time, it was a good car. So, if you're going for one of these things, you are going to be going closer to 10 grand. Yes, you can pick one up for 2 or 3, but it will need the 8 spent on it. It will need money spent on it because a lot of these cars, because of the pricing manage and parts pricing, the work's not done and you've got to go do it at this end of the market. So factor that in when you purchase the car. You're going to be spending a bit more money. That's why I've said C is a good car on a budget. This one is if you want to go a little bit further. Both are good fun though, so it's up to you which one you like. Also down to the way they drive. In terms of personal preference, I like the E more, but there'll be those that will like the C. So take a look around in the classic Merc lot. In terms of residuals, they're not going any lower. If I had to pick one that's going to go up, it'll be one of these with a 6-cylinder engine. But they do cost more to run. I would say they're still relatively anonymous enough for you to drive them as dailies, and they're cheap enough to fix for you to keep going as dailies. So a 4-pot is where I recommend in these two. I recommend you go for a 4-cylinder one. But, again, find a decent 6, you'd still have a good time with it. Thank you very much for watching. If you like what we do, remember to like and subscribe.